Here we are.
Hello, Patty.
Hello, Joey.
How's the surf been, mate?
Yeah, I had a great surf yesterday.
Did you?
Yeah, I feel all the better for it.
Nice. Did it leave you reflecting on some questions?
Yeah, it left me reflecting on lots of questions.
Nice.
Number one being, why don't I get more surfs like that?
It's true, isn't it? It's the inevitable surf.
Yeah, I would like to see a data set on it, but it'll keep me going back for more.
It's interesting because you can, I guess, have data on your surf. So in terms of kind of all these apps and stuff that are coming out, but would you find that distracting?
I was actually thinking about that because family, different requirements coming into different stages of life, and I was wondering, paddling out, I was like, what's the time, what's the fam up to? Yeah. But then I just was like, this is the one opportunity I have in life where I don't feel measured, or other than myself, I'm always measuring myself. I think I try and escape that.
Yeah.
But I was like, I should have a watch on my hand and I could see if there's anything urgent. Sister-in-law's about to go into birth. There's a few things, but I just really relished the moment of just floating, getting tumbled, getting in my own little world, helped by the ocean, just getting me in there. I had a few waves that held me down a bit yesterday, and they're hard to come by, and I actually really relished it. So
did you? Yeah.
I'm not going to get a data metric calculator or collector on my wrist anytime soon.
No, I tend to be the same with surfing for sure. So it's kind of, I think it's, certainly one of my kind of first questions is really about exactly that. So does kind of having data points on something that is not mystical, but is certainly kind of special, is it actually better left unmeasured? So kind of actually having kind of those points, what does that actually do to the experience? Because do you tell the story? So for example, with surfing, would you come back and tell me that you swam 2Ks yesterday and that your average speed was 31 Ks on a wave? If it was, I wouldn't know, but certainly probably I've never gone 31 Ks on a wave. Maybe maybe to the bottom, perhaps once or twice on something a little bit oversized. But saying that, you probably wouldn't tell me that story like that. You probably wouldn't have started, talking about the surf that you had yesterday through the lens of data. So one of the questions I've been thinking a lot about, does it take away the magic?
Well, I think it's a question. When you started saying that, I was like, well, an interesting question that you could ask of data and tell a story from it is, who does take out a data point to capture that, and what does that say about people? And using that as a metric. But I suppose the actual activity of it, does it take away from it? It's an interesting question.
So certainly that's been one thing that I've been pondering. What about yourself? So I think, what do we get? We get three questions each. Yeah.
I really did the overview. I was just, what is data storing compared to just storytelling? Other than you've got these data points, metrics, but what makes it so different? And really want to dig in there about how to battle your own biases, and want to chat to an individual expert in the field who does a lot of this, and want to hear some of their methodologies around fighting their own biases coming into telling a data story, because I think that still comes through. And how do you do that, and what are your methods to sweep those biases aside?
Gotcha. So you're kind of interested in the bias, the inherent bias that is natural in all of us.
Yeah, even if you're looking at a data set. Yeah. And what is different about that process to just telling an everyday story or representing something different that isn't data storytelling?
Yeah. So does it change it? Does it actually change it? Yeah. I think that's really interesting, because it's the kind of, it's not that even the bias is unconscious. Like even in journalism, one of the things that you have to wrap your own head around in writing a story is actually that you have your own bias, right? In terms of actually how that comes across, and being able to kind of represent multiple viewpoints is actually a skill. So is that part of data storytelling? I wonder. It's a good question.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to finding out.
Nice, cool. So my second question, is really, I've been thinking a lot, kind of what we were talking about last time around this idea of kind of the mythology and the kind of the search for meaning that is actually in humans, and kind of the there's a lot of theory around why we do that. So even kind of, going all the way back to kind of like boiler and attachment theory, and the fact that, we're kind of always looking to kind of reconnect with, he goes as far as to kind of talk about that it's all about kind of your bond to your mother, in terms of that you're kind of then, as you go out into the world, you're seeking that same wholeness that you found, even before you're actually aware. That's a bit of a rabbit hole for what we're talking about. It's not early childhood development course that we're chatting through, but what I'm kind of interested in is that this search for meaning and kind of mythology, and how we actually create that. And a lot of that is then about kind of in narrative. I'm really interested in about kind of, building out on the first question around how does data actually intersect with that narrative. So there's a lot of kind of, whether it's a story arc, so kind of like Joseph Campbell's kind of classic, like the hero's or the heroine's journey, in terms of actually kind of they're going through different stages. I'm wondering about how that plays out in a data storytelling sense.
Yeah, okay, from the start, in terms of getting the narrative structure there.
Yeah. So kind of how does that actually come into it? Because there has to be a process of sense making, but ultimately, humans, we're conditioned because, of this. There's lots of different kind of theories as to why, but we're quite often looking to fill the void, and in doing that, we have a propensity to believe in myth, right? We've celebrated. It goes all the way back through history, but kind of there's all the myths are ultimately about telling us a story, and either telling us an enlightening tale, a cautionary tale. There's some level of kind of wisdom to it, and I'm interested in kind of how does data fit into that. So if you were to redo,
is it myth crushing or myth building?
Yeah, maybe that's a better way to put it. And yeah, does it actually create the chapters like it would in kind of a classic story arc? Does it need one, right? Does it actually kind of work better in that sense, or is it even a thing? Like, am I kind of naive to think about it that way?
I don't know. From my sense, I don't reckon you are, but I'm looking forward to hearing. I think that's the art. When we were talking about this last week, it's the art. But yeah, that's who we're chatting to. I think a lot of analytics get lost in just telling you the end, but it's being able to bring you on that journey to make sense of it. But
yeah, that's true.
Forward.
Yeah, me too. Because I guess just kind of it's just making me think that our point we were touching on last time is that about like the reveal and kind of like, is there misdirection?
In there,
yeah,
to get the hooks and get you along the narrative. Is there a bit of magic to get you there?
Yeah, and is that in like the best kind of, because it's evolving in terms of the way that data is used to kind of paint a picture, so to speak. But I'm just curious about kind of how that's done.
Yeah. Is it ethic? Is it just how it's done?
More how it's done. Like, I'm not the ethics of it. I think it's it's human. It's human to tell a story. So I'm just kind of, but data is also kind of, it's a human creation, but yet it's not mythical, it's actual. So I'm interested, just curious to kind of put that question across.
Around that one as well.
I probably have to clarify the question a little bit.
Yeah, but I reckon it's got a lot around that.
Yeah,
that'll be fun to have a swim under the water and see what's under a few rocks with another in the room.
Yeah, so I think, I guess kind of like my homework out of this is to just clarify that a little bit. But I think the idea of the idea about how like it forms kind of narrative arc is the broad area.
Yeah,
I
like that one
to look at.
Yeah. The next one would be, where is data storytelling going? Like, what is data story in the future, and where's it find its place? A lot of the research I did through this week was really just looking on the back end of where I was coming from last week, is what industries it intersects with and what use cases it has. And it has a variety, but it's moving at a fast pace, and people are pulling it this way and that way, and no one has a grip on really what it is. It's a very tangible, fluid concept, I think, that can lend itself to a lot. But I would like to hear someone who's been in the field, an expert in the field for 5 years, and maybe chatted to a lot of other people who are also practicing, just what it means and where they see it going. I'm interested to hear their forecast.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you're asking that, because like even like when I've been researching it, is that it feels a bit like kind of things like kind of design thinking and kind of that sort of stuff, where really that didn't have it didn't have a home until, for example, like kind of like Stanford with D School kind of coming out of the guys from audio, in terms of kind of that whole process of kind of ultimately that was an industrial design kind of skill set, in terms of kind of looking at it. If you're going to build a printer, then why don't you think about all the issues that the user of that printer is actually going to have, and then build the product in that manner? Because it feels like it's borrowing from a lot of disciplines, but when I've looked around, it's not like there's no institute for data storytelling, that's kind of at, like MIT or anything like that. Like there's little labs, and there's people kind of talking about like data visualization and all of this. So getting a perspective from an expert, I think, on like, is it going to become institutionalized? Is it going to become a skill set, like design thinking has, for example?
Yeah, because it sits in marketing, it sits in analytics, it sits in a whole different areas. So yeah, as you say, I'm just fascinated. I don't know if they'll have the answers, but they'll definitely have a perspective, and looking forward to hearing.
Yeah. No, it's true, and it's that contrast. I guess it's if I can add like a little B to your kind of question two, is like, it's more, maybe we should ask them about that. Like it's not a discipline, but maybe it's a perspective, right? So maybe it's multidiscipline, but it's actually you kind of see a lot of this at the moment. Just going back to the design thinking example is certainly probably the strongest, but it's more a perspective, right, within it, but it's multidisciplinary in terms of how it gets built.
It's true. It's probably a good thing, a strength in it.
Yeah, cool. All right, so that feels like a great question. And what was your last question?
I'm just trying to remember.
That's all right. No, mate, it's all good. It's good. Do you want me to go?
No, that was it. It was actually, I put this down as the first one.
Yeah.
And what is the most important element of data storytelling?
Yeah.
And we've sort of touched on this with this conversation, but I feel like it's going to go on too. It's the data, or the ability to tell the story and communicate the story that's there, or find the story, or maybe it's the ability to ask an intriguing question that starts you on the journey of the data, because the data can be anything. It can be boring as hell, or it can be great. So it really is touching on that point where you were going, and that's the perspective that the person who's creating, or the people that are creating the narrative, is being able to share that perspective and communicate it effectively, or is it the interesting data set?
So, so the kind of looking
I've definitely got my bias coming into this, but I want to hear another.
But maybe that's kind of where we start off the chat, is kind of just thinking about kind of like the definition of the actual area, and kind of breaking down, like we were talking about last time, those three component words, because there's the data, there's the story, and then there's the telling. And it feels like that's kind of an interesting kind of probe to that question in terms of definition, like how skewed would the kind of the expert make it towards kind of whether that's kind of, is it more data, is it more story, or is it more tell, or is it equals?
I know. So curious to hear about that, and curious to hear what other people feel on that one as well.
Nice, cool.
How about number 3 for you?
So my last one, perhaps going to be a little bit abstract, but I think it's getting there. Well, you never know. What I've been also kind of reading is that, so the kind of data sets are actually informing a new type of intelligence. So in terms of kind of from an AI perspective, we're actually because of the data that we actually consume, we're now able to kind of create like pseudos for kind of being human. And so this ability for can data tell stories in terms of actually, the data points actually being able to start to talk. So for example, there's now software that kind of actually can help you write books, can kind of actually be predictive in terms of how narrative is actually starting to go. So I'm kind of interested to get that perspective as well, about kind of how is that part of the discipline in terms of, or the kind of this area, this way of looking at the world, and almost in some ways it's kind of this is where it does get a little bit kind of like abstract, is that we're kind of creating, we were talking about this last time, we're almost creating like new totems for ourselves, right? So this idea about finding, you said this last time, and it's kind of left a lasting impression in my head, like it's this search for beauty, and there's a resolution in these things, but the machine is actually doing that. So yes, there's an operator putting those things together, but it's a machine construct. So yeah, I'm kind of interested, not in a maybe more in a Blade Runner sense than like a Terminator sense, in terms of like, I don't think it's like the end of the world, but I do think there's things happening, right? And it's all changing so quick. So I just kind of want to get a sense of where this is actually heading, and maybe pose that through the lens of artificial intelligence. What happens when the data can actually tell its own story?
Well, I'm so glad you've answered that. I think that'll be a good one, top and tail, starting with that question that we just posed before about the elements. Is it 1, 2, or 3, or equals?
Yeah.
And then with this, I think we'll really round it up about where's it heading in the future and what is it with AI, because that really says the same thing in a different sense. Because if you're a data storyteller, someone has to program the AI anyway.
Yeah, true.
So that's sort of that intersection. Where is the AI sitting in there? What is that in the process? And is there an extra part of the process in the storytelling? Is there the question or at the start that's the key element?
Yeah, and it's kind of, because it just makes me think like a lot about like even like how like video game kind of platforms and that sort of stuff works, is that's all becoming multi-directional depending on how you behave and interact with it. The machine behind it, there's 20 different kind of ways it can actually go. So I think we touched on this last time. It's kind of the holodeck kind of analogy, which I think we'll inevitably get to, in terms of this kind of immersive reality. But the idea when the data starts to tell its own story, I'm kind of interested.
But is it telling its own story?
I don't know. Is it? It must be. It could.
Yeah.
Can it have bias, right? I guess that's that's the other thread that goes through the questioning, is that I
reckon in a story there's always a dance, there's always a 2, there's never a 1. There's the audience in the story.
But we would be the audience.
Yeah, I know, but I think that the audience helps guide things. Whenever you're telling a story, you got to think of your audience.
True. Yeah.
And so, I don't know, it depends. I mean, would the AI have a bias? These are all very deep questions.
It's a good one. I mean, maybe that's a little bit too narrow, but
it's narrow but open.
Yeah, like it's implicit in terms of that it probably has to. It probably has to have bias.
Yeah.
It does it. Yeah. It can't be. It has to be, because the data. Oh God, we're really digging deep. But the data, in theory, has bias already in it, because we have biases as human beings.
That's true.
But our behavior, actually, like what we do and what's recorded, is just what we do.
Well, that makes the data set that you're using is
maybe more pure.
It's more pure, but more serious in the question of the telling.
Yeah. True.
It is. Yeah. Well, it's fun to go here.
Yeah, nice. All right. Cool. Well, I'll take a step back.
Does anyone else have any questions out there? Joe and I had a ball doing this.
Yeah.
And we started this process, and we wanted to ask the listeners and viewers if you have any questions about data storytelling that we haven't covered that you think could work, or be able to ask an expert in the field. It's a fluid place, as we've gone through with this. So if you do, send them in. We'd love to pose a couple. We might not be able to get to them all, but we'd definitely love to get to some of them.
Yeah, and I think what we said was that we'll try to kind of knock out 1 or 2, like depending on the amount of kind of like the questioning that comes back. But certainly if you have a perspective on making what we've been speaking about a little bit clearer, or there's something else that we should be asking, or something in what we're saying that is better posed another way, then let us know.
All
right, cool. Well,
until next week, we'll have expert in the field to answer all these questions. So maybe one day we'll have a AI in the room, and we'll be able to ask these questions.
Perhaps, yes. Yeah. But that is...
Siri? Are you there?
Well, is Siri the new god? But anyway, that's for a whole other area. All right, Pat, till next time.
All right,
cheers, bye.